Our first presenter for part 2 is what is called as a county boy, born and raised at the top of the state. That's north, because I'm from New York City, and that's where north was. He grew up in the potato fields, deep, cold winters, working from the age of 5, the experience that is the base of his existence. He's a design professional, an amateur artist, and now a budding archer. Uh-oh. My outlook can be defined by a poem. The heights by great men reached and kept were not obtained by sudden flight. But hey, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night. The 3-word title for this gentleman's presentation is Finding My Target. Ladies and gentlemen, John Ossie.
Thank you. Since my other presenters took advantage of an opportunity to provide a preamble for their presentation, I will say that if you remember the movie Princess Bride, you remember Fred Savage was getting a little upset over the story, and Peter Falk basically reminded him the story turned out okay. I'm telling you a very personal story that has a rather bleak beginning, but a triumphant end. I'm going to take these off because if you can't see me, I can't see you. This is a story in which I'm the main character, but it's a story I think that perhaps some people in this audience can probably play the same part that I'm playing. It's a story of a very slow descent into darkness and a very fast, triumphant rise back into the light by virtue of some very strange circumstances. I suffer from what's called degenerative disc disease. That is, the discs in my back degrade spontaneously, and over the last 10 years, I've lost 5. Those discs crack and break and rupture and push solid material into my spinal column and compress all the nerves there. The result of which basically is pain. Pain becomes the constant reality that I live with, or did for 24 hours a day. And that pain, unlike the pain that the TV commercial coach has to deal with when he makes that dramatic choice between Advil and Aleve, gives basically the definition to the word unbearable. And so you seek relief, and I did, through spinal injections, through surgery, through acupuncture, through massage, through all kinds of things, ultimately going to what most people rely on for this sort of thing, which is medication. And the kind of medication that you have to take for pain that I experience is the kind of medication that you see when somebody's so strung out on the street corner they don't know their own name. At one point in time, I was taking up to 12 medications every day. Some of those medications were for the sole purpose of dealing with the effects of the other medications. I was on a quick descent. I didn't really realize it. It was very slow, very meticulous, but it was definitely happening to me. These are some of my drawings, which kind of express the mood I was in at that time. Twisted like an old tree is what I was, not only in my body but in my mind. The medications that I was on, primarily opiates, began to rob me of my personality. Began to rob me of my ability to function, my ability to think, my ability to focus. And my life was taking significant changes. So at one point, I felt basically powerless. Like this great engine, the Umsuzukas of Maine lore, which sits on the Allagash Waterway, basically sitting on the tracks with all its power stilled and no place to go. That was me. So when I finally did hit bottom, I felt like I had no personality, no place to go. And as I told my wife once, I was simply biding my time. That is actually me. And the medications were the biggest part of my life. In fact, they defined me. Either the lack of the medications, too much medications, the need for medications. It got to the point where, of course, opiate addiction became a medical condition in itself. But at one point, my wife and I were doing the one thing we still did, which was yard sale, and I came across this bow. Ironically, this bow was being sold by a man who'd fallen from a roof, hurt his back to the extent he could no longer use it. I became fascinated with it. To this day, I can't tell you why, but I bought it. This is called a Valiant Crusader. It's made by a company called the Oregon Bow Company. It's actually a rather famous bow. I became obsessed with it because I have only obsessions. As my wife will tell you, John has no hobbies, he only has obsessions. And I became obsessed with this bow. The first time I picked it up and tried to pull the string back, I couldn't get it back 2 inches. It was set basically to pull at 80 pounds. I wanted to know all the pieces and parts and how it was used. So I set up an archery range in my house, which is not easy to do in a Portland yard, but I did. I set up some 15-yard targets, some 20-yard targets, some 25-yard targets. My neighbors all hid, and I began to try to use the bow, just to pull it back, just to figure out how to fire an arrow at a target and hit it. And every day I got better. Here are just a couple of targets you can see. I actually began to hit the target and not the cat, and I was getting better at it, but there was something that was happening, something rather magical which I didn't expect. It turns out that all the activity that was required in my back and arms to pull that bow back was exactly what I needed to fix my back. And as I got stronger and stronger, I decided to try some things on my own. For instance, I would fire up to 50 arrows a day, one at a time, and then I would retrieve the arrows by walking all the way around the house to get them. I found that after I fired 50 arrows, I'd walk 2.5 miles, something I hadn't done in years. And I would do it every day. But the bow was teaching me other lessons too. I was getting my focus back. I was getting my precision back. All the actions that are necessary to lead up to the single firing of an arrow, all the focus and concentration and the power that it took to do it were giving me back my strength, giving me back my life in a way. And this is actually a newer bow, as you can tell. It's somewhat different from the old one. Here are some of my targets weeks afterwards. I was firing with incredible precision. I was strong enough now to pull the bow all the way back at its full draw of 80 pounds. I was firing arrows so hard they were practically going through the target. I began firing at night with only candlelight to lead my arrow and muscle memory basically to hold the bow. Then I did the impossible. I fired an arrow and fired another arrow right up the shaft of the first one. Wow. Now I knew I had mastery of the bow, and I knew I was taking control of my life again. I had so much muscle now on my back, I threw my cane away. I dropped my medications from about 100 milligrams of OxyContin a day down to 10. I dropped my 12 medications down to 3. I went camping with my wife for the first time in years. We climbed the hills at Quoddy Head, up and down the cliffs. We slept in that tent, which is something I couldn't have done years before. I began to enjoy myself again, all because of that bow. Now, the bow is something I do every day. Those are my bows. These are now the stars of my story, not the artifacts of my life, my cane, my crutches, my medications. My Matthews Z7, my PSC Stalker, my original bow here, the Oregon Value Crusader. These are the things I use every day. I now fire between 50 and 100 arrows a day, and I just get stronger and stronger every day. That is a shadow of myself there, as you can see, way over there on the side. That's me today, standing there, pulling that bow at 70 pounds, firing an arrow at about 350 feet per second, something I could not have done just a few months ago. That's how fast this took place. I found that bow back in June. Wow. This is the center of my target, as my first slide suggests. This is what I lost and what I've regained. My wife of nearly 30 years and best friend of nearly 40 years. This is the reason I do everything, and this is the reason I've come back. Thank you.
John Ossie, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. John, I've got your specs, so we can see you. John, I've got your glasses. You can see us now again.